Welcome back to another MOTOBOB video where you join me again in the studio with one of my favorite looking motorcycles on the market, the Kawasaki Z900RS. I've always loved the design of this bike ever since it came out a couple of years back, but it's only recently that I've actually been able to spend any decent time riding one. So does it go as well as it looks? Well, in this video, I'll tell you exactly what I think. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Fowlers in Bristol for lending me their demo to shoot this video. If you live in the Southwest and you fancy taking this out for a spin, just go to the link in the description. I'm sure they'll be happy to help. Also a big thanks to Beeline Moto for sponsoring the channel. If you want to add like sat-nav capability to a retro bike like this without ruining the looks, then Beeline Moto is absolutely perfect. It's a small and neat looking device, easily attaches to the bars of pretty much any bike. The round shape really fits in with the mirrors and clocks and headlights on a retro like this, and yet the app is really well designed and you get easy to follow directions. Again, there's a link in the description if you want to find out more. Clearly this bike was always going to be pretty decent to ride because it's heavily based upon their modern naked roadster, the Z900. It's a super popular bike and a proven performer, and the RS gets pretty much the same inline 4 engine. It does get a slightly different tune. The Z900 is much more likely to spend more of its time on track days. This is really a road focused bike, and so it gets more mid-range and less at the top end. But still you get that silky smooth delivery, plenty of power, plenty of guts, and it also gets roughly the same frame design. They have extended the subframe to give it more of that 70s look, that longer seat, but ultimately the steel trellis design is not a million miles off. And when this bike was first launched, it had slightly better brakes and suspension than the Z900, but they've now updated that bike, and again they're pretty much the same. Clearly though, they look completely different. You know, the idea of the Z900RS is to pay tribute to the original Z1. That's a kind of era-defining bike that really did bring a huge boost in performance to the market. And so with this bike, they wanted to celebrate the history of the Z lineup by giving it some of the same looks. So you get that teardrop-shaped tank. Absolutely beautiful, fits this bike perfectly. And they've even extended it down into the frame there so that despite the more svelte shape, it actually maintains a decent capacity. Like I say, the longer bench seat and then that little ducktail at the back definitely ties in very nicely with the Z1. A round headlight and twin analog clocks up here in the cockpit. Yes, it gets modern cast aluminium wheels, but they do look a little bit like spokes because they've given it more spokes and they're smaller. And then you've got details like the fake air cooling fins on the engine casings and loads of fairly historically accurate paint jobs on offer as well that look stunning. And it all makes for a package that absolutely makes a brilliant tribute back to the Z1. At least to me it does anyway, but I mean, I'm too young to have ridden the original Z1. I've just seen pictures, so visually it works. I do read as many of the comments on my channel as possible though, and in the previous videos I've made about this bike, there are a few common themes that come up. Although the original Z1 did use an inline 4 as well, I've seen a few comments that say that they wish that this bike was air-cooled as well to give it more of that accurate feel and sound. There's also been a few remarks about this horizontal monoshock and how maybe traditional twin shocks at the back there would have looked more on point. Certainly something you see on other retros like the Bonneville lineup from Triumph. But perhaps the most common one, and the one that I'm most on board with, is that the original had a 4x4 exhaust system. So 2 silencers on either side. This one's just got the single silencer. It does look nice in the chrome and it's got a nice little finisher on the back there, but it's not quite as striking as the back end of the real deal. Thing is though, there's pretty good performance reasons for it not having some of those features. I assume it'd be pretty difficult for Kawasaki to now make an air-cooled inline 4 that makes competitive power figures like this does, and also pass the stricter emissions regulations that we're now seeing. Take Honda for example, they were still building the CB1100 till recently with an air-cooled inline 4, but it wasn't great on power, certainly not like this, and they've also had to discontinue it anyway. The horizontal shock is a signature design feature of Kawasaki's, and there are a multitude of reasons for it. I mean, number one, it saves a little bit of space, it keeps it compact. Number two, they talk about mass centralization, so keeping the heavy stuff towards the center of the bike. So versus having twin shocks out the back there, certainly you can see how this helps. For emissions, you've got to have a pretty big cat under the bike now as well. So if you had a vertical shock there, it would affect the placement of this. So again, it helps them to place this higher and keep it centralized. And then also it keeps the shock well away from the heat of the exhaust, which can obviously affect the temperature of the oil and whatnot. And so having it up there leads to more stable and predictable performance from the shock. With the exhaust system, they said that yes, they considered designing it with a 4-silencer system, but obviously 4 silencers is going to weigh quite a lot more than just 1 silencer. And so Kawasaki's designers made the choice that the extra weight just wasn't worth it for the aesthetic improvement. And it has to be said, this bike is pretty decent on price as well. It starts at £10,849, which is about 150 quid cheaper than the Triumph Speed Twin, for example. Would that have been the case if they'd have developed a specific air-cooled inline 4 for this bike? Or if they'd reworked and re-engineered the back end, the swing arm, the subframe, probably the rest of the frame to be honest, in order to take twin shocks. Or if they spent 4 times as much on silencers. I mean, all those things would push the cost up of this bike, and its good pricing is one of its great features. But look, more than that, a modern classic or a retro like this, it has to balance out 2 things. Number one, the sort of classic, timeless styling of some of the bikes of the past, and also some of the charm and character. And I think we can all agree that this bike delivers good looks in absolute spades. Whether you're stood over there looking at it, or whether you're riding it, I mean, this cockpit is just beautiful. The sort of teardrop tank beneath you, the chrome on the bars, and then the twin clocks with the speeder and revs in sort of analog needles, and the little details like the round mirrors, it really does make it feel charming. But you know, you could get that stuff from going out and buying a proper old bike, a real classic. And the reason people don't is because they want a retro, a modern classic, for the performance, the build quality, the reliability, the safety features, and the tech. And I really do feel with this bike, having ridden it a few times recently, that it really does deliver on the road. Fundamentally, the engine is lively and powerful and exciting and grunty and smooth, and it sounds good. But also there's not a lot of technological intervention. You don't have a lot of riding modes. There isn't a different throttle map setting for each mode. You do get 3-mode traction control, but you can just ignore that if you want and not mess around with it. And at the throttle, which is still a cable throttle, not necessarily like a ride-by-wire system, it really does feel very direct. This is not a docile, sedate, easy-going retro, it's exciting to ride. Same for the handling as well, you know, it feels great, the suspension's great, it's comfortable, yet it's still agile. And also, the brakes surprised me. I thought they were gonna be a little bit under spec, perhaps. It's Kawasaki's own branded equipment. We're used to seeing perhaps something a little more bling on bikes like this, but the feel at the lever is excellent, nice and firm and crisp, and it has a nice bite to it, and I really like the feel of the front brake on this bike. And so for me, it is right in that sweet spot of that balance between the old school looks and the modern performance. I really wouldn't change a thing about it, apart from I do agree on the exhaust system. I do understand Kawasaki's rationale, but you can get aftermarket 4x4 systems like Delcovic. It just looks incredible, and so if I owned one, I'd almost certainly be saving up for one of those systems. Honestly, if I was looking for a sporty, lively, performance-orientated retro, then this bike would definitely be in my top 3 in my shortlist that I'd go and demo before I made a decision. I still need to review the XSR 900 for 2022, a great looking bike, and also it's based on the MT09, which is a wonderful bike to ride. And then there's always the Triumph Speed Twin, which I think is similar in price to this bike, similar in performance, but in terms of character, really quite different. Fortunately, if you're struggling with that particular predicament yourself, I've already made a head-to-head video, and I'll link to it here so you can click on it now and go and watch it and then make your decision. Unless you're thinking about the XSR, in which case hit subscribe if you're not already. As soon as that review goes live, you can watch it.